Last video on the channel was IdrA vs Artosis in Starcraft 2. That was a game from the Wings of Liberty beta, where neither player really knew what was going on, and it honestly didn't mean a whole lot. This game that was played around late 2012 is also between IdrA and Artosis, and also with IdrA on Protoss against Artosis' Terran. Now, this game is way more funny, and I haven't seen it, but I can just anticipate the carnage that is going to ensue. But IdrA's playing Protoss against Terran on the well-known Brood War. And whenever the Wings of Liberty beta came out, no one really knew what was going on, but everybody had a better off-race in Brood War because they played more off-race games, and it was way more common for players to race pick. And what is race picking, you might ask? It's well, since there wasn't like a standard ladder in Brood War, like a play again, people would use Icy Cup, like a third-party macro and stuff, like a third-party ladder and stuff like that. But they would also play customs against their friends, meaning that if you're a Terran player and you don't like TvT and you're playing a Terran, you can just like pick Protoss or Zerg, and you don't have to play the annoying mirror matchup that nobody likes. So this is what people would do. They would race pick. And at the beginning of IdrA's career, his Brood War career, he would race pick Protoss against Terran because TvT was boring. Now, whenever he went into his peak at the end of Brood War, he did end up playing Terran. But he is sort of picking Protoss because it's like, oh, do you want to play an old Brood War game with your friend? Yeah. Oh, let's play a 42-minute TvT. Well, nobody wants to do that, so it's like, oh, I'm going to pick the race and matchup that's actually fun. And IdrA and Artosis have played a million games against each other. They like to mess with each other, and they know what gets under each other's skin. And TvP in Brood War is this sort of matchup where the onus is on the Protoss player to keep the Terran on the back foot and really mess with the Terran and make their life a living hell and screw with them. And if you're the Terran player, it can be a very vexing matchup because the Protoss player is doing everything in their, basically in their power, and no matter how ridiculous or off the wall it is, they're just going to throw stuff at you to try to keep you on the back foot. This could be proxy gates, gates in the middle of the map, whether it be like a gate, one gate on 8 or 2 gates on 10. It can be an aggressive Dragoon rush that pressures the bunker. It can be a 2 gateway rush that attacks with Zealots and Dragoons. You can do that build with the Warp Prism and then drop the Zealots on the tanks past the bunker. That's called the Bulldog. You can do that rush with the Reaver. You can do a Reaver macro build. There are a million different things that you can do to your Terran opponent to keep them on the back foot. And there are different levels of abuse to these builds. There are different levels of cheesy. And there are a ton of different ways that you can go into these options that offer different things. So a great example of that is what we saw this game, where Artosis played real safe, and IdrA sort of knows Artosis likes to play a safe, standard, methodical macro style, because IdrA likes to play the same way, and IdrA went Nexus first. He did sort of what would be called like an eco-greed build, or an economy cheese, where he played very greedy, he played in a way that gave him the best economy, and if Artosis did a cheesy rush, IdrA would have been in trouble. But IdrA know Artosis doesn't play cheesy, so he went Nexus first, and then he got one gate, skipped the Zealot, got his Cyber Core, and then he put himself in a position where he could get Dragoon range right out the gate. And he really didn't sacrifice a probe at any time. And he has a ton of workers. We can see that IdrA's ahead in the worker count, and he's going to continue to pull ahead because Artosis' expansion is on the way, and it's not on the low ground. So Artosis playing his standard safe way, and because IdrA went for a Nexus first, he got the early game advantage. And this is just a beautiful little exchange of early game macro edges that show that these guys have played against each other and understand the strengths and weaknesses of each other. And hilariously, since IdrA and Artosis were always on the same side, not just in team leagues like playing for the Media Clan, but whining about the same things, IdrA and Artosis sort of like know what the obnoxious stuff is. They know what they hate to play against. And if you're a Terran player, what's the really annoying thing? As IdrA says, the kiss of death, Jake's approval. But so this is Jake. Jake is LZ Gamer. So LZ Gamer is the Cajun Zerg who's observing, and EG in control is the late great Jeffrey John Vincent Robinson, who played Zerg in Brood War, and LZ Gamer played Terran in Brood War and loved the hide bases. And LZ Gamer famously played really cheesy and played a good Zerg off race and would go on to play Zerg in Starcraft 2. The LZ Gamer base is a meme that Artosis references, which is like when you take a base in the most like off the wall ridiculous spot that would never get scouted. But this is classic Brood War where you play a 1v1 and your friends pile in and they observe the game, and then you're alone in a Discord channel, your opponent's alone in a Discord channel, and everyone else is observing and sort of laughing at the game, saying, "Oh, I can't believe he's being this cheesy. Wow, look at his macro slip. Can you believe this guy's build?" And this is sort of like the bread and butter of Brood War. And whenever you play Brood War with your friends, part of like learning the game and having fun is your friends play 1v1, but everyone else watches, and you sort of learn and grow and build together. Whereas most games now, a lot of times it's about like beating your head into the wall and playing these contrived team game settings. As IdrA's getting a observer and his robo bay just finished, so I expect him to go into Reaver. Artosis is getting a starport and pumping double workers as he's finally achieved his natural and really gotten it humming as far as having mines out there. Notice the gas and turrets are still coming. And IdrA's getting shuttle speed, he's getting a Reaver, and he's getting a third base. And Artosis getting those turrets. Artosis has never been shy about getting his turrets, and we can see like the turrets and the gas are still coming up, which is why I was sort of framing his base as not completely functional yet. And IdrA has a nice spread of Dragoons across his natural. Artosis' natural as a soft contain. Is Artosis is scouting around these left side bases and making sure IdrA doesn't have them. IdrA walking around with an observer in front, of course, scouting for spider mines. And this is a very standard Terran vs Protoss that we've seen so far, where the Protoss opens for Dragoon range, gets a plethora of Dragoons out, gets a fast observer, and then he sort of goes into a certain tech path that allows him to get his third base. Sometimes this is Arbiter, sometimes this is Speed Zealot with upgrades and a lot of gateways, but most frequently I would say it's the very powerful Reaver. The Reaver allows you to move around with the shuttle. You always get the shuttle speed, and you put the pressure on with Reaver drops. You can also help bust a front door with Reaver drops, or you can help defend attacks with the Reaver and the shuttle, but it really puts you in the driver's seat. It's sort of like going Muta against Terran if you're Zerg. You really have the ability to attack and test your opponent's multitask. IdrA sees the factories 3 and 4 coming up, drops the Reaver, blasts the tank, and he brought a couple Zealots there as a meat shield and to help harass. Unfortunately, the Scarab does not go off there for the Kraken. So great defense there by Artosis. I can definitely see, yeah, dropping it off again and continuing to poke. The Scarab misses. So the Reaver does tremendous splash damage and is very daunting to play against, but it can miss shots. A lot of times the Reaver shoots a Scarab and it looks like the Scarab's going to kill 30 workers and it just kind of duds out. And I'm not sure who Austerity is, honestly, but I know the other two guys. So IdrA is going to try to poke in at the natural. He sees, okay, he built turrets. And IdrA just sort of testing Artosis. These guys, of course, both playing primarily StarCraft 2 at the time. This recorded around like the height of the Broodlord Infestor boom and Wings of Liberty. So I'm sure at some point they just said like StarCraft 2 is boring. We're bored. Let's hop on some Brood War, play an old Brood War game. For both of these guys, their soul is in Brood War, and they sort of live and breathe Brood War, and that will always be their favorite game. So to say like let's fire up Brood War and play against each other, both of them are like fuck yeah, I'm down. They used to play this against each other as some of the few top tier pro gamers in America. This is their ethos and their soul, and is more than just a game they used to play for fun. So Artosis is still on extended 2 base, his third's almost done. He's making multiple depots at once. IdrA's making another observer as well as a 4th base up in the top left. Artosis is getting an attack upgrade, he's getting a couple Goliaths, he's grabbed the dropship. Looks like he's going to go for Vulture drop here, which I really like. That's a smart move. But IdrA has a plethora of Dragoons out. He's soft containing Artosis, making it hard for Artosis to take a third. Artosis has a Vulture patrolling the 2 top middle bases, but IdrA hasn't attempted to take those. That's really a non-issue. IdrA has top left humming away and has so for several minutes now. Top left with a big worker transfer. IdrA is known for his macro, which people might wonder, like, known for his macro, what does that mean? He doesn't get supply blocked. He doesn't have a lot of idle workers at his bases. Once the workers finish, he has them go to mine very quickly. He consistently makes workers throughout the game. Notice it's 64 workers to 51 with IdrA at a solid advantage. Once a base finishes, he does a nice little worker transfer right when it finishes. Not 3 minutes later when it's late, not 2 minutes early right when the Nexus starts and all the workers get there early and get spotted. Everything's clean and crisp. Notice his production tab. Going into Stargate, going into Templar, 3 more gates. Getting an attack upgrade, getting observer speed, getting zealot legs. This is proper, intelligent, methodical macro. He's terrible, IdrA says. And remember, they might all be in the same Ventrilo channel, since this isn't like a practice game back from 08, but like a fun game they all played together. But I think IdrA might just be talking about Artosis. Actually, no. It looks like he's talking about other people. ESC mana. It's weird that he said ESC mana and not like his tag at the time. But that's sort of funny that he talked about mana not being any good. Mana, of course, like went on to win a DreamHack, or won a DreamHack in like 2011, and then won another like a big tournament like in 2019. Anyone know where my second shuttle went? So this is really hard. Found it. This is one really hard thing about Brood War is like you have limited control groups per hotkey, and there's no control army hotkey, so it's very easy just to like lose parts of your army and like whenever you're being attacked and trying to macro and multitask, being like, where the hell is my army? So this is a little island base in the bottom left, by the way, like a low ground island where there's no proper ramp to it. And Artosis is going to drop and attack this bottom left base for IdrA, and IdrA's just going to try to stall around here. He has a couple goons, but not enough to defend. And this is one of those things where these bases are very hard to defend because you can't just wheel your whole ground army down. You have to transport it with shuttles. And IdrA tries to do a bit of a shuttle bomb, but Artosis has a plethora of units. Reaver's here. Probes being pulled, 2 goons sent in west. But Artosis fastidiously brought multiple dropships worth of shit down here, and he's going to take this left side position and try to swing down and get bottom map control as well. So, just a brilliant move from the Tosis. You know, it's very tempting just to go down there with 1 dropship and siege a couple tanks. It's so much harder just to get stuff from point A to point B in Brood Wars. IdrA has a plethora of Zealot Dragoon. But Artosis, he brought not only a lot of stuff, but a nice mix of stuff. Not just vultures, not just tanks. Brought in Goliaths too, so whenever whenever shuttles came in and dropped stuff on top of them, they were able to be shot and not just constantly microed back and forth, up and down. And that's what the Protoss is hoping for, a bunch of siege tanks together that are easy to deal with. And IdrA's still up in supply, which is normal for this matchup. But Artosis is pressing the main here. He's trying to kill the Stargates. Doesn't want to deal with the Arbiters, which there's 2 of them on the way. As one of the Stargates dies, that's a big deal. And a Storm goes down there trying to clean up the drop. He doesn't want to deal with carriers either, which is the other thing that the Protoss player will try to make to really mess with the Terran in this matchup. As a nice little Goliath behind the mineral line is cleaned up there. But good play there from Artosis. Not only did he snipe a crucial third base, but he sniped a Stargate. And a lot of playing against Terran late game is limiting the power units that they get. The High Templar, the Reaver, the Arbiter, and the Carrier. And the Arbiter is just such a pain in the ass to deal with if you're Terran. It can stasis your tanks together, which you're, because you have limited control groups, you're always going to just have a big control group of tanks along with the rest of your army. Tank Vulture, you're going to put your tanks on the same hotkey. It's just very easy to clump them up and have them stasis, which prevents them from firing. So the Terran can stasis half your army, your tanks, and then kill all the Vultures, run past, do damage, and then camp the respawn. As you see, a plethora of Protoss force screaming here as Artosis sieges, and storms going all over the siege tanks there. The storms doing tremendous amounts of damage as Dragoons are piling eastbound here, a massive arc of Dragoons, and this is the sort of IdrA macro that's always talked about, as most foreigner Protosses would have an entire control group less of Dragoons here, as even though he lost the bottom left base, IdrA just churning out a tremendous amount of units. I don't even think he had stasis researched yet. And then he said, really, you're really, really bad, he says to Artosis, who was, poor guy, just trying to range out and take his third base at 16 minutes, for Christ's sake. And IdrA just keeping his goons out in front of Artosis is natural. Notice that he has the left side of the map, including the top middle. Just a phenomenal job by the macro machine. And he's lost that bottom left, yeah, but he's alive and kicking with this top side. And remember, he mined so much out of the bottom left that it was sort of worth it, as Artosis is just trying to range out here and have the control of the front side of his natural. But it's so brutal. It's like whenever you're playing Zerg against Terran in Starcraft 2 and they take a base that's like a planetary right next to your third, and it's Terran like, well, how am I supposed to defend this? And Artosis' answer to that is to take bottom right. But with this massive Protoss army right in front of Artosis' front door, it's very, very difficult to do anything. And Artosis is ranging out with mines. He's trying to see, like, okay, shit, he has this base. Well, I really hope he doesn't have the one to the right of me. And that's almost one of those things that you don't want to know. You don't even want to look at your phone to figure out the truth. It's like, I think I'll just shoot these probes. Like, I don't even want to know if he has that base right next to my main. You know, I think I'll just kill this mineral line. And it really is something to see just how many goons IdrA has. IdrA just has a plethora of Dragoons. This comes down to having plenty of gates. This comes down to, look how many gates he has. And notice he has them all in one frame. Like, he can just go back to his base and make like 8 goons at once. He's not having to scroll around 3 different times. And IdrA's sort of out here saying like, my macro is not going to slip. I'm not just going to randomly like not have as much stuff as I should. And that's what's funny is I think without any big stasis going down, you would think like as the Terran player like, oh, I'll probably be okay to like range out here. It's only like a few feet outside my natural. Well, IdrA just had like a 2 whole screens worth of Zealot Dragoon. Usually when you see engagements around that time with Arbiters, it can be like, well, a big stasis went down and the Terrans sort of got beat up because they had too many tanks close together, but no stasis is there for the macro machine. The research wasn't done. It was storms, and storms really ate Artosis alive. As more Zealot Dragoons going to go down here, as wow, a huge storm softening up the Goliaths, a bunch of tanks come up, and IdrA might just run in here because he has a lot of money and he just wants to remax and torment Artosis. Another big droopy storm goes down. As a follow-up storm going down, screaming down upon the tanks is the Zealots. The Zealots and Dragoons just crushing eastbound, as you see a mostly Dragoon mix, as not many Zealots, mostly Dragoons, just a plethora of Dragoons, as once you run out of Zealots, the Dragoons really get beat up bad by the tanks, and that's what we saw in the last 5 seconds of that engagement, is the Dragoons without Zealots really having a tough time. But Artosis does hold. He has a nice little contingency bottom middle, which is cutesy. It's cutesy, you know. It'll keep him honest. But IdrA has that bot middle base. IdrA has a tremendous amount of income. But with Artosis up at 61 workers, he's looking better at this point in the game than he has in a while. Now IdrA is going to make some production topside. This is like a standard Protoss thing where at some point you know that Terran can base trade you effectively and put you in a lot of trouble, but if you continuously make stuff out on the corners of your base and in your exterior bases, you're able to not die to that, and we can see that IdrA does a nice little stasis here, and he does a storm right after to keep the vultures at bay, and IdrA is just continuing to put on some production. We can see in the top middle there, a ton of gates have gone down. And at this point, I think IdrA's just going to make a couple waves and then crush downward. As the tanks have been stasis so they can't shoot, IdrA puts some storm down on the part of the army that is vulnerable. He has an observer out. He sees, okay, no mines. And this is what I'm talking about. You stasis the weak part, the clump part of the tank army, and then, wow, look at that. You're camping the cooldown of the stasis, but generally you want to be a bit closer right when the tanks come out of stasis. You just blast them all. You don't even take a shot, you just insta-kill them. But Artosis continuously scanning to see the units that were under stasis. This is a beautiful macro game, a phenomenal back and forth. Notice that IdrA's made cannons at each base, and Artosis has taken that side base, that cute little 3 o'clock. And Artosis has quite a bit of money, as IdrA's money has been kept lower, but Artosis did have that big spike in money from the bottom right, and he's even taking that middle base, as it looks like Artosis has a foothold in the middle. Now, will IdrA go for a big droopy recall? Will he push the natural? As it looks like storms go down on the contingency of tanks. As IdrA is in a bit of trouble here, he's going to kill the building base and then probably swing northbound, as he really does not want to lose all these gateways he's built at the 12 o'clock base. He might even be able to save that base right by the 12 o'clock. And IdrA has a plethora of mines to clean out. Notice how many mines Artosis put in the retreat path. Artosis does want to fight at that natural, and Artosis has some high ground vision, but he's sort of trapped between a rock and a hard place where he doesn't want to fight up the ramp, and IdrA doesn't want to go down the ramp, but IdrA comes in with the droopy flank, screaming northbound with arbiters, and Artosis' supply plummets. He's now down about 30 supply, and IdrA did lose that base, which is a moral victory for Artosis, but the Kraken still has all those gates up there, and that's really, really difficult when Protoss is producing out of 2 huge gateway contingencies. And with Stasis Observer here, it's not very useful to have a minefield as it would be in an early game, as the minefield does kill about half a dozen goons, but the stasis and the observer being clicked in front of everything does help. The stasis is used there more as a blocking mechanism, and this is one thing that can be very annoying, is whenever you stasis a ramp, think about like force field on the ramp from hell, because the stasis units can't be damaged and they can't attack. But what you do there if you're the Protoss player is, oh crap, one of my exterior bases is being attacked, let me fucking stasis the ramp, and when you do that, they can't move up the ramp, and Artosis just runs out of steam there and decides to tap out. So that was IdrA versus Artosis in Brood War. IdrA had a huge lead the whole game. IdrA really was crushing Artosis. Whenever he did not have stasis, Artosis had a nice little foothold where he pushed out and took a third, but IdrA just had so much of the map with the bottom left. He had retaken the middle. He had a gateway contingency. He was going to bleed out Artie, and that was the extent of the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. These are 2 friends duking it out. Have a good one. Sub for more.